your response in the text box if you want, and just make sure that it, in the chat box, make sure it goes out to everyone, or you can unmute your speaker. Has anyone used scenarios in their teaching or in curriculum development before?
Hello, this is Michelle. Yes, I have. And in my experience, they're kind of a simulation of a work-related experience. So it's kind of a problem, and so you set the stage, and then you ask them to sort of go through the discovery of information, but also then developing resolutions or solutions depending on the context of the scenario. But they kind of mimic what you would see in a workplace environment.
Yep, exactly. And yeah, so they allow learners to kind of apply skills that they might learn in a classroom in a workplace, as Michelle said. Also, Matt, you can make animated scenarios. So they kind of engage and motivate learners because they're kind of fun to go through and look at. And Vivian, you mentioned that it's a situation which a learner responds to different aspects of the situation. Vivian, can you say more about that? Different aspects of the situation? Vivian, are you there? Okay, well, maybe we'll hear from her later. And Scott, yeah, the learner has options and they make decisions based on what they've learned. And it's like a story. Yep. So yeah, you guys hit upon all the key points of a scenario. My next question to y'all is, why do you think we use scenarios? Why are they beneficial to learning?
Well, this is Michelle again. In my experience, they kind of bring a higher level of learning and understanding because they bring many skills together, so they are sort of more complex. And also, they give interest to the student because they're contextualized to the work environment. So it sort of helps them understand the relationship between what they are learning and the actual application of these skills in a work setting.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, and you're echoing a lot of what people are saying. They apply their understanding of the concept. Thank you, Matt. And yeah, higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So they're not just recalling information, but actually analyzing and in some cases creating solutions. Yeah, and it helps learners develop critical thinking skills. So I think you guys actually touched upon all of these points. Another benefit of scenarios that Clark and Mayer kind of found out in a bit of a scientific experiment that they did was they took medical students and half of the group learned concepts through kind of more traditional face-to-face training, and half of the group learned through online scenarios. And the group that learned through online scenarios were able to apply their skills more effectively in the job. So scenarios are great for actually improving job skills. As you mentioned, it encourages more analytical thinking. It also creates long-term memory. So Kathy Moore points out that students are able to kind of recall information more effectively over the long term when they've actually gone through a scenario utilizing that information. And as you guys have pointed out, it's engaging and motivating. We'll kind of see an example of that later on. I kind of couldn't help but play with all these scenarios this past week while creating this presentation. So I want to take a look at one model of how to create scenarios. Many of you have already created scenarios or are in the process of doing so you might have your own way to do it. But I just wanted to point out Tom Kuhlman's 3C model because it's a really simple way to create simple scenarios, but to also create even more complex scenarios. And we'll see examples of both of those later on. But basically, he breaks down the scenario into 3 components. challenge, some choices. Doesn't have to be 3 choices. It can be, you know, however many the challenge deems. So they recommend keeping it around 3 to 5. And then consequences for each choice. So what he recommends is kind of when you're creating a scenario, putting yourself in the shoes of the learner when they're on their job. So, you know, when you're thinking of challenges, what actual situations is the learner going to have to use this information, and what choices would they have in that challenge? And I think when you're thinking about choices, it's important to keep in mind to keep the choices real and not obvious. And not all choices have to be, you know, 2 wrong choices and 1 right choice. In a scenario, oftentimes like in real life, a few choices, you know, could be appropriate, and the outcome might be a little bit different, but that's kind of the way life is. So we'll see that in an example later on where it's not just a wrong choice and a right choice, but various ways to kind of get to the same consequence or the same outcome. And then finally, thinking of consequences. So what are the consequences of each of those choices? And I think this part is really the discovery part of the scenario. You know, once a learner makes a choice in a scenario, the consequence they get can be an opportunity to provide content, course content, to provide feedback. It can also be an opportunity to link students to outside resources where they can read a little bit more about the topic. So for me, this is really how scenarios become kind of more the guided discovery that we talked about earlier. Any ideas when you're creating scenarios of where you can get all this information? Who would be a good person to ask when you're trying to think of a challenge and choices and consequences for a particular work environment?
Hi, can you hear me? This is Vivian.
Hi, Vivian. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I have a couple of situations where I'm working with medical assisting and with nursing and with physical therapy assistants. And so I go to the people who are the teachers, the people who are practicing those, and talk to them about the situations.
Great, exactly. Yeah, and I think kind of echoing to what Matt's saying, subject matter experts, people who've actually been in those situations. They'll be able to provide you with realistic choices and actual consequences of those choices. Excellent. Willie from faculty and industry leaders, and Bonnie of the advisory committee meeting that you're going to tonight. So maybe you'll have time to ask them about some challenges they face in the workplace. Great. So we're just going to take a look at a simple 3C model. As I mentioned before, scenarios can be as simple or as complex as you want to make them. You've already seen, many of you have already seen this scenario in a previous webinar from Margaret when she talked about assessment. So here we have the challenge. I think we have a dog there. Welcome, Fido. Here in the red, we have our challenge, okay? And in the blue, you can see 3 choices. I'll give you a minute to read over those if you haven't seen them already. And what I notice about these choices is that they're all, you could kind of talk yourself into choosing any of them. There's no one obvious right answer. And that's what kind of makes a scenario unique. It allows the student to really manipulate the information and process it a bit more than a regular multiple choice question. And then in the purple, we have consequences for each choice. And again, here's where they bring in some content to explain why that's a good choice or what might happen if they choose that option, and some feedback as well. Any questions so far?
I have one on consequence C. Somehow that seems a little, I won't say far-fetched, but a little out of the normal of what you might choose. And so I question whether that's really even though it says it's the best one, because the thief wouldn't think it was anything important.
Mm-hmm.
Is that really a choice somebody would want to do?
Good, yeah, good question. I think here maybe they're trying to do they're throwing in something a little bit for entertainment.
Okay.
The chipmunks sing disco duck, but you're right. I think in terms of the feedback or in terms of the consequence, to really keep it as realistic as possible. And you know, who knows if a thief would look at this CD in disgust and break it up. I don't know that that would really happen. But when you guys are doing your scenarios, yeah, yeah, seriously, when you're doing your scenarios, to really think about, you know, from their subject matter experts, what would actual consequences be? We have a question from Matt. Should students explain or elaborate on the consequences instead of a multiple choice answer? Can you explain that a little bit, Matt, what you mean? I don't think I understand completely.
Yeah, instead of the consequences being explained by the instructor, would they apply their knowledge by explaining what would happen in these various situations?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think what you bring up is another great point, that scenarios aren't only for e-learning. You know, it's a little bit difficult to maybe explain something in an asynchronous class or online, but you can be using these in face-to-face situations as well. And in that case, Matt, yeah, I think that would be a great idea to, you know, encourage students to actually go through their thought process and explain the consequences themselves. Any other questions?
But could you utilize a discussion board to have students interact and elaborate online?
Yeah, I don't see why not. Does anybody have experience in doing that? I've never done it before, but I don't have a lot of experience with online courses. Does anybody have experience utilizing discussion boards with scenarios and being a little bit more open-ended? Well, Matt, you might be our first one to try that. But yeah, I don't see why not.
You could use it as a discussion question, and then allow people to join in discussions on what they think might be the best choice and something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't have to be. Yeah, I see what you're saying. It doesn't have to be just a multiple choice. You could even stop it at the challenge. How should he carry the data with him? And then have a discussion based on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
this is Nicole, and the one thing I might add on that is those would probably work really well with soft skills type training, or training that might have a more subjective bent, where there really isn't truly a right or wrong, but given a situation, there's a better answer. And that those types of things would probably work well in a discussion board, because you could see multiple viewpoints and people could argue their own example.
Yeah, and I think as Bonnie mentions, with short case studies, you know, often you have a lot of group discussion and like Michelle mentioned, the soft skills of kind of negotiating and defending your point of view. So yeah, that would be a great way to kind of exercise those skills a little bit more. And in a webinar a few weeks ago, Vivian, you asked if there was a way to kind of incorporate multiple learning objectives in a scenario, and we're going to take a look at a way to do that in what Tom Kuhlman refers to as branching scenarios. And
thank you.
They're basically the same simple 3C model, where you have your challenge, your choices, and your consequences, but you know, built on one another to become a bit more complex and to cover more content. And also, I think in many ways to kind of reflect a real job situation. So if you can see in this diagram here, in our first column, we have our simple 3C model. But then if the student chooses choice 1, you know, they get their consequence and their feedback, and then it leads them to a new challenge based on that consequence. And so you see in the second column, we're presented with a new 3C model with the challenge, 3 choices, and consequences. And then if you notice in this second column, what's a little unique about this is that if the student chooses choice 1, they're not presented with a consequence, but they're actually presented with a whole new challenge. And I kind of like this because I think it really reflects what actually might happen in the workplace, where you know, you make a decision, but that decision brings on a whole new set of problems that maybe you haven't considered, and it helps guide you through the challenges that are subsequent by making a particular choice. So it's kind of hard to visualize all this from these little diagrams. So I'd like to take a look at an actual example. I have a few examples of branching scenarios here. And if you download this PowerPoint, you can link to these directly. But the first two I chose because they're in the healthcare setting. But what I'd like to kind of go through with y'all today is the third one, Connect with Haji Kamal. And this was a scenario that was created by Kathy Moore, and it was for soldiers who were being deployed to Afghanistan, and it's for cross-cultural training and how to deal with Afghani people. So we're going to take a look at this scenario together. And as we look at each of the, let me see, can you all see the screen Connect with Haji Kamal? Okay, great. And I'm going to ask you, so that we can all communicate while you're looking at my screen, if you move your cursor all the way up to the top of the screen, you should see a drop-down menu that says viewing, I guess, viewing Margaret's desktop. And if you just click on the chat icon, that should bring up the chat box onto your screen so that you'll be able to type in your comments and see everybody else's comments. Do you have any questions so far? Okay, so what we're going to do is kind of go through a few slides of this scenario. It's 10 minutes long. We're not going to go through the whole thing. But as we go through, I want you all to put yourself in the perspective of a learner and just type in to the chat box what you find compelling, what really works in this scenario. And we'll discuss those points a little later on. So this is the first slide, just setting up the context. I'll give you a few minutes to read through it, and then just tell me what you find interesting about this scenario. Yeah, you get to be in the role of the advisor, so you're actually given quite a bit of responsibility throughout the scenario. It draws you into the story. It gets learners interested. Yeah, the pictures are really cool throughout this whole scenario. Now, we're not asking you to draw these kinds of pictures, and Roger has some other stuff on his software to represent people and everything, but these pictures are particularly engaging. And yeah, Michelle, it tells you how long the scenario is going to take. I mean, branching scenarios could literally go on forever, so it's nice to have an endpoint as well. Yeah, Bonnie, we're only on the first screen so far. We'll move to the next one now. Another thing I'd like to point out that I like about this scenario is that it's based on a real event. So I think that also kind of, for me, that draws me in because I know that this could also, this could actually happen to me as a soldier in Afghanistan. So that's a little bit more motivating. All right, so here we have the next slide, kind of introducing the characters. What do you find compelling about this one? Good, it's a believable storyline. We're introducing people with actual backgrounds and experience, or lack thereof, names. Good, it sets the stage. I think this is also something to consider when you're presenting in your scenario, to provide enough context for the students. What is the setting? What are the resources available to them? What are the constraints? Yeah, it's got a comic book feel to it, which is fun. Good. It gives you the sense of two different viewpoints, and we'll actually see more of that later, Vivian. And gives you the characters. Okay, let's look at the next one. Anything interesting about this slide? Good. Vivian says that she can see that the lieutenant better listen to his squad leaders based on, well, their facial expressions alone. I wouldn't want to mess with them. Nice, Jerry. Yeah, actually, I didn't notice that, but yeah, it kind of brings in a multicultural dynamic. Yep, and we got new people, so it kind of adds a twist to the story and adds a little bit more suspense. Yeah, I agree, Michelle. The font is a little bit difficult to read, and that might be because I'm sharing my screen. It could be a little bit bigger on your own screen, but what I like here is, if you notice, they write in the second person. So you and Lieutenant Harrell are going to Haji Kamal's home, and most scenarios do, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's telling a story of a third party. So this really brings you into the scenario when they're addressing you directly. Okay, anything about this slide? Oh, sorry, Vivian. Oh, you meant that he should listen to the squad leaders based on their experience. Okay. And Nicole, yeah, the drama. So you notice something odd next door, and it establishes some suspense. And yes, Matt, they actually give you a specific goal, so it's very clear in as a student, what your purpose is here in the scenario. Okay, good. Okay, I think this slide, again, it's just continuing the story. It's adding a little bit more suspense. Our lieutenant's getting worried. So finally, after this kind of setting the context, we are presented with a challenge. Are you all able to read that? Okay, so it says, ask your squad leaders for ideas. Now, this next portion has some voiceover, which is really cool because it's actually the squad leaders talking to me. But unfortunately, I tried various ways to get that sound to you guys, and way too much feedback from my speakers, so I wasn't able to do so. So I'm just going to kind of summarize what they end up saying. But we have this squad leader who is basically saying, don't accept the tea. Just let them know that you're allergic to it, and it'll be okay. And this squad leader is saying, well, you shouldn't lie, the first one is saying you should accept the tea, that's what's culturally appropriate. This guy's saying you shouldn't lie, you should just let him know that you're allergic to it and decline the tea. So here we're presented with a couple differing viewpoints on what Lieutenant Harrell should do. And then it asks you, what do you recommend that Lieutenant Harrell say? And we're presented with our 3 choices. So anything about this particular slide that, that you like as a learner? Good, yeah, it gets right at the heart of a cultural question that might seem kind of arbitrary and not that important, but in this particular training of building cross-cultural relationships, it's extremely important. Yep, and the use of media makes it engaging. The choices, Willie says, the choices really make you think. They're not obvious. And because you're given 2 opposing kind of suggestions from your squad leaders, it makes the choices even more difficult. And again, yeah, the comic book layout. Okay, so I'm going to let you all make a decision. Let's say this top one is A, and then B, and then C. Just type in what you would choose, and we'll kind of take a majority poll. Ooh, we got A, B, C. Thanks, Roger. Okay, so it looks like the majority of you would choose C. So let's choose C. And then we immediately get some feedback or a consequence. Haji Kamal smiles and pours a cup of chai. So this kind of tells us, oh, we might have chose correctly because he's smiling. But rather than stopping there, we're presented with a new scenario, a new challenge. Now this keeps going on for another 10 minutes. But what I'd like to point out is kind of how a visual representation of how this scenario looks entirely mapped out. So we're going to go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, and here we have, again, this is from Kathy Moore's site, so you can check this out on your own time if you want. And I know that the font is probably really small, so I'm going to do a little bit of explaining here. But this is the whole scenario mapped out. So we start with an initial challenge, and as you go out, everything in the diamonds are more challenges, so you can kind of see how they branch out. From one challenge, we have 3 choices, and then based on our choices, we have consequences that lead us to a new challenge. Now, if you noticed here, let's say we choose the wrong choice. So we don't accept the tea, and then we don't accept the lamb that he offers us. And then we're in a place where no matter what we choose, we're going to fail this scenario. Okay, and just indicating that we obviously don't have a good understanding of the Afghani culture and the importance of tea and food offered to you in their home. But as you can see, if we go to make some right choices, we're presented with a different challenge and a different scenario. And this keeps going, and what I'd like to point out here is that, you know, if you stay on the right path, then you'll eventually get to a point where you pass the challenge either at a good or acceptable level. However, there is opportunity for you to, you know, make some wrong choices and then correct yourself. So what I like about this, it's not that, one choice is always the right choice, but if you make the wrong choice, the game's not over, which is true in real life. So it really emulates what an actual problem scenario would be on the job. And at the very bottom here, you can see we have a range of feedback depending on your choices. So from fail to poor to acceptable, and then all the way to good. Are there any questions about this so far? You're probably thinking, do I have to draw something like that? and you don't worry. We'll show you what you can do to make it a little bit easier. But I just thought this is a nice visual representation of that scenario. Okay, well, we'll move on. So just some tips from Tom Kuhlman. We already talked about asking subject matter experts about the scenarios, the choices, and the consequences. It's good to focus on what you actually want the learner to do with the information in a job setting. And make it real. Make it as realistic as possible to motivate the learner. Also, you can have learners discover information. So, like we saw in the Haji Kamal scenario, we actually chose the best option. But if you choose one of the less appropriate options, you get responses from Haji Kamal that aren't him smiling. It's him looking concerned or him looking frustrated. And these are ways that the learner discovers that what they've chosen is not necessarily the best choice. Have learners use the information to make a decision or create a solution, and include useful resources throughout. They didn't really do this in the Haji Kamal scenario, but one thing that you could do is, for example, when he offers you some chai, and the learner chooses a choice that's not that culturally appropriate, you could link the learner to an outside resource that explains the importance of food and tea in building relationships in Afghani culture. So you can link it to outside resources that might help the learner kind of learn from their experience. And keep it simple. Scenarios can get really complex, and even if the scenario is complex, you can still keep the wording simple. You can keep the goal very simple, as as they did in the Haji Kamal scenario. You had one goal. And then the last point, keep it interesting. And this means balancing the learner's skills, what they know, with the challenge. And this is what Dr. Csikszentmihalyi's flow channel, we're going to call him Dr. C. He refers to this as a flow channel. And as you can see here, the flow channel is where the learner is most engaged in a scenario. So as soon as you get too challenging, the learner is going to get frustrated. And as soon as you are utilizing too many of the skills that they already know or already have, they're going to get bored. So you really want to try to balance it throughout the scenario, keeping them challenged, but also keeping them on their toes in terms of the skills that they know, that they have acquired, and those that they're in the process of learning. Okay, I think that about covers it for scenarios. Just included some of our resources that we went through today. Are there any questions or comments? Okay. Hopefully that's because it was really clear, or you're all asleep. Oh, Vivian, how long is the expected turnaround time if we submit a scenario? That's a good question, Vivian. I think we're still kind of experimenting with that. We've done one scenario with Lily from NOVA, and we're actually going to see that in a few minutes. And I think it took, what, Roger? That was like a day or two, maybe, to get a prototype out and then get feedback. Yeah, okay, a day or two. But you know, it really will depend on kind of the influx of activities we get from the various colleges, because some colleges could be creating a lot of scenarios, some only a few. And okay, yeah, Roger mentions that there's a lot of waiting on feedback. If the objectives are clear, that makes it easier. So this actually brings us to our next point and answers Emily's question as well. We have created some templates that elicit all the information that Roger needs in order to create a scenario and storyline. So I'm just going to take the next few minutes to go over these templates with you. And then if you have any questions about them, or if you want me to, talk to you on the phone and we can go over them one-on-one, we can do that, once you get into scenario development. So first, wait, Emily has a question. Is anyone creating scenarios around med terminology? Maybe we can reduce duplication of effort. Yeah, and this also we'll talk about because we're in the process of trying to find a place where you all can drop your content, your activity ideas into probably a Dropbox, and then other people can see what's already been done and potentially use those for their courses as well. So let's take a look at some of the templates. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen with you all. So here on the Curriculum Development Resources website that I mentioned earlier, we have the weekly webinars. So here's a couple that we've done in the past, and I'll post this one as well. We have curriculum forms and templates. These are those lovely 10-worded forms that you all have been filling out this week. And then we have activity templates, which is what we're referring to when you want to create when you want Roger to create something in Storyline. So right now we just have a drag and drop template and an example, one for short or open answer, and one for branching scenarios. I also have a template for multiple choice, but Margaret mentioned that a lot of you might already be using templates for multiple choice. So we didn't include it. If you want me to send that out to you all, I can. But let's take a look at the branching scenario first, since we just covered that with Haji Kamal, and it's actually the most complex. So don't get too deterred from this template because it's definitely the most involved of the three templates. So basically, this first page of the template is going to be the same for all of the templates. We have what is the course for, what particular module, and then if you have an activity title and just a brief description of the activity. And this kind of helps Roger know where you're going with it. And then what learning objectives does this activity address? And then these things may or may not be seen by the learner. It's up to you. But then beginning here is what the learner will actually see in the scenario. So some directions, or setting up the context, which in the Haji Kamal scenario were all the beginning slides that we went through. And then if you want to include any multimedia, maybe a picture, as in Haji Kamal, we saw some comic graphics. Some people I've seen use a video, or Roger has, little avatars in Storyline that he can use. So you don't necessarily have to come up with your own. And then the attribution license for that particular multimedia. Okay, and then we get into the actual scenario. And as you can see, it's set up in a 3C format. So we have our challenge, and then we have our 3 choices. And again, you can adjust this to make more or less choices. And then we have our consequence for each choice. So this is I labeled this challenge A, start. And you can label it however it is that makes it easiest for people to follow. So in the template, there'll be a place for you to label the challenge because Roger will need to know how each of the challenges link to each other. So here we have the chai challenge, and then we have each of the choices, And then the consequence or the feedback. So for each choice, we have what will appear to the student once they select that choice. And then, most importantly, where will this choice lead them to next if it's a branching scenario. So if they choose no thanks, they're going to go to challenge B, and I labeled it B wrong because this was the more wrong of the 3 choices. If they choose yes please, they're going to go to challenge C, right, okay, and so on and so forth. And then as you go down, now we'll see what challenge B is. So here we have the label. This is challenge B, wrong. He asks another question, do you want lamb? We have our 2 choices, not 3. And then where they go if they choose the first choice, they go to challenge D, wrong. If they choose the second choice, they go to challenge C, the right one, which was the same as up here as well, the right one. And then we have challenge C. And this continues and will continue. I just did a few of the first few challenges, but it continues until as long as you want the scenario to go, basically. Any questions about that? Okay. The next couple of templates that we're going to look at, they're much more intuitive, I think. This one is for short open answer, and this template is actually based on Willie's example that she gave us. Oh, this is the actual template. I want to go to the example. Oh, we're having some difficulty with the link. Okay, 1 second, and I'll pull up the example template. Okay, so this is for a short open answer, and this is an example that Willie submitted, and here she has her course, Health Information Management. She has the module that this particular activity is for, and then she has a very excellent descriptive description of the activity. So it's an interview scenario. The learner chooses a character. The learner arrives at an interview and is given asked some questions, and they type in their responses. I think it's maybe Emily or Jerry. Could you mute your speaker because we can kind of hear a lot of feedback? Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so then we're given the interviewer asks the learner some questions. The learner answers their questions in an open text response, and then the learner self-assesses their response based on a best answer that Willie provides, given a 0 through 5. So 0, no answer to the question, and 5 clearly encompasses the best response. And then she wants the score to be tallied at the end, and this is the kind of key. Here are her learning objectives, and then provide some directions to the student. There was no actual scenario. I mean, the scenario is an interview scenario, but no written scenario other than that. No multimedia. And then we go into her questions. So she has her first question, and she provides a hint for the student, and then a best answer. And then the student evaluates their response based on the best answer. And then she goes into her next question, provides a hint, and then what the best answer, points that the best answer should include. Okay, so I just want to actually take a look at what this would look like in Storyline. So Roger took this information and then he put it into Storyline, and this is what we get. So that's our interviewer. Looks pretty nice. And we begin the interview, start off with some instructions. And then we begin. So here we get to choose our how we would dress for the interview. And so let's say we choose this woman. It immediately gives us feedback. So telling us, you know, you got a 1 out of 5 because this character is dressed too casually. And then we continue, and we're asked our first question. And here's a hint. Okay, and then we can type in our response and submit. And this one actually, you know, the answers are going to vary, so I'll give myself a 5 for that. Not a great response, but. And then we get the second question. We have our hint. We can type in our answers and then get what the best answer is and evaluate ourselves. Okay, and this continues until the end of the scenario. So that's what a lot of the scenarios that you guys submit, or a lot of the activities you submit, will look like, similar to that. But I think Roger has a lot of variability in terms of what the look and feel of it. Any questions so far?
Does Roger have scenarios that are more medically related, or examples that he can use?
Roger, do you have anything?
Yeah, there's a few other ones that I've done for, gosh, it was like following a workflow. Let me find a link. I'll post it in the chat.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. And there's also, Vivian, the examples in the PowerPoint that I showed you with branching scenarios. Those weren't necessarily done by Roger, but those are medically related.
Okay, great. Yes.
Okay, so that was for a short answer, short open answer template. And then the final one that we have on the site is for drag and drop activities. So this one is actually from the Open Learning Initiative, Carnegie Mellon site. And again, we have the introductory, the course information, learning outcomes, learning objectives, directions, and really the only thing that's different is the format here. So usually in drag and drop, you kind of have 2 columns where you're matching, you know, concepts from column A to concepts in column B. So each of these is, thanks, Roger. Roger just posted the link to another Storyline scenario or activity that he created. So you guys can check that out. Actually, I wonder if I can go to it now. Let's see what it. Okay, wow. Ooh, beautiful. I haven't seen this yet. So actually, we're on drag and drop, and this is a drag and drop activity. So we can take a look at this and see what a drag and drop would look like in Storyline. Now, I have no medical background whatsoever, so you all might have to help me with this. So complete the flow chart. So what's the first choice? Admin staff. Thank you, Roger. Yep. Okay, and then we go to the next step. Does anyone know this one?
Yeah.
Oh, hover over the left box to show the complete portion of the workflow. Oh, okay. So this shows the process.
And actually,
Weigh the patient. Okay.
This workflow that you're mapping right now, Brooke, was designed to come after students have had an opportunity to view a workflow that had been videotaped, and so that you were supposed to map the workflow after you view that.
Okay, thanks, Nicole. You're kind of coming in quietly, but I believe what she said is the activity we're viewing right now is after students have watched a video that demonstrates workflow and shows the process, and then students do this to kind of show their knowledge of that video. Was that correct, Nicole?
Absolutely. Sorry,
there you go.
Yeah, my earpiece or mouthpiece had been up. In the last grant, we created some activities for the VA, and there were 3 or 4 workflows. The first one that we did is we videotaped a blood draw workflow in the Bellevue College Nursing Lab, and students were just to observe a workflow in action, kind of one as it is, and then one that had been modified or made better. And so we've got those videos. And then we filmed a workflow in a pharmacy, a prescription refill in an outpatient pharmacy. And once again, students had to view that, and then they needed to make suggestions on how that should be modified or improved upon. And then we demonstrated that. And then finally, they were supposed to view a workflow and then map it. So all of these are accessible and open. And so if you've got interest in workflow at all, please let us know. We've got all of these resources.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. Okay, I think that about concludes this webinar. I know we covered a lot of information, and again, if you have questions about the specific templates, how to complete them, please just contact me, and we can probably best to do it over the phone. We can give you a call and go through it together. Are there any final questions or comments? Thanks, Vivian.
You're welcome.
Okay, is anyone planning on using scenarios and creating some for their materials?
I am.
Great. Well, we had a great time doing the one with Willie, so we would love to get your ideas and work through them and create something that's fun and interactive. So just let us know. Okay, if there's no more questions, that concludes our session for today. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.